we need to connect it to larger issues about oppression in the United States. The United States, I would say objectively, is the worst abuser of human rights in the world. If you look at what the United States does internationally, the invasions, the proxy wars, the sanctions, the 800 military bases around the world, the fact that we have more people in prison than any, 2 million people in prison, and a lot of them end up in prison for minor offenses. Most of them are, by the way, most people incarcerated in this country have not committed a violent crime. So the prison population could easily be cut in half. The military budget could be cut in half. But people died alone. The COVID pandemic, where mostly Black people. There are some cities in this country where the only people who died were Black. So I hope that people see this as part of many systemic problems, and the fact that we live in this kleptocracy. We need to stop saying we're a democracy, stop talking about being great, being free. It's all nonsense. And the COVID pandemic has exposed so many things that are wrong in this country, that people have been thrown out of work, some forever. But the rich have gotten richer. And all the talk of opposing Trump and being the resistance, Trump gets everything he wants from Nancy Pelosi. They gave him a space force. They gave him the military spending. On one hand, he's a maniac. He's crazy. We got to get rid of him. Well, why do you give him everything he asks for in military spending? This is because of propaganda. There's been decades of propaganda from the Democratic Party telling us that we have to support them. And these horrible people, they foist these horrible candidates on us and then blame the left. It's always the left to blame. You know, the American empire. First of all, we shouldn't live in an empire, but we have a system that's in collapse, and we're watching it, we're seeing it, we're living with it, and it can go either way. Things can get better or things can get worse. But I think we're seeing in I'm calling it a rebellion in Minnesota and across the country after George Floyd's murder. We are seeing that people know that things are wrong, and they are looking for leadership and looking for organization, and that's what's missing. It is all to the good for this spontaneous uprising to take place, but in the absence of organizing, things can get worse. So in the face of the COVID pandemic, there are people who may lose their jobs forever. There's not going to be a return to our lives the way they were before. But it's up to us. And I want to bring up another group I'm affiliated with, Black Alliance for Peace. And we have a campaign, No Compromise, No Retreat. And we talk about the issues I have brought up. We have a candidate pledge asking people running for office at all levels of government to pledge to cut the military budget in half, to demilitarize the police, to investigate every instance of lethal force, to close all the foreign military bases, to cut mass incarceration, to cut the military budget. And there has to be grassroots organizing. And this is something that hasn't happened in this country for a long time. So we're starting from scratch, but we can definitely do it. And I think we have to marry the domestic with the international. I was speaking about human rights abuses. There we are. Thank you. Calling on the UN to address human rights violations in this country. The US is always going to the United Nations about Hong Kong, which is part of China. And it's for people in Hong Kong and China to figure out for themselves, not for the US to use that as a weapon against China. But the US needs to be investigated for all of these things that I have been talking about. We definitely, if the US asks for everybody else to be investigated, anybody they don't like, Maduro is a drug trafficker. Now they're trying to say his wife is a drug trafficker. It's obvious and it's horrible. But the U.S. must be the next target for investigation. But now they're showing their true colors. Last 24 hours, we have seen elected officials blame. We actually have Black leadership, quote unquote, talking about outside agitators. The mayor of St. Paul, I've blanked on the man's name, Carter is his last name, a Black man who said, I'm told most of the people arrested were from out of state. They weren't from Minnesota. They're coming from elsewhere. Well, just the opposite is true. Someone did good reporting and just looked at the list of people arrested, and 88% of them are from Minnesota. Well, it's just white supremacists. It's Russians. Everything except people have had enough and are speaking up. So now we see the media working to delegitimize this rebellion. As far as the issue of violence is concerned, we live in a country, and I think we get into these arguments because people don't want to acknowledge how bad the system is we live in and how undemocratic. People have no out. We've seen people murdered on film. We saw Eric Garner, the cop who killed him, actually ended up getting a raise. Every time he went to court, he got paid overtime. The man doubled his salary after killing Eric Garner. It took the city of New York 5 years to fire him. So people know the likelihood of anybody going to jail is slim to none. And so any exhortation to be peaceful falls on deaf ears. Right. Why should people do the same thing that failed? They have to up the ante. And I think the fact that protesters, the district attorney, the prosecutor there in Minneapolis, a man named Freeman, the day before, he was saying, well, you never know. I don't see any reason for criminal charges. And protesters actually literally went to his house. Yeah, and torched one of the police precincts. That's why that man was arrested. And we cannot act like that is not the case. We do not have a system that's responsive. The prosecutors are in bed with the police. They work together. The police arrest and the prosecutors prosecute, and 99 times out of 100 get a conviction. So we don't have a system.
Unless it's for a police who's committed a crime, in which case it's like the opposite step.
Yes, it is. So we've seen
grand jury even, yeah.
Yeah, we've seen these egregious cases over and over again. People aren't stupid. People haven't forgotten. And just to be told, well, it's on video, everybody knows that doesn't mean anything. So if people are angry and if they steal from a store that has insurance, Target has insurance. I don't care if people took from Target. Yeah. It's I don't know that I would do it, but I'm not going to condemn people who did. We have people out of work trying. We have a system that's so horrible. People couldn't even get their unemployment. People who lost their jobs after the quarantine. Most states were lagging in even getting people the money they earned. At the most $1,200, or one-time payment of $1,200. And so people have a lot to be angry about. So I think the anger is not just about Floyd. It's about all of the injustices and the inequality in the country. So, and I'm not going to talk about Antifa and people came from, somebody, went from, I don't know, Chicago to Minneapolis to protest. And even if it's true, so what? What's wrong with people going to the scene of the crime to register their anger? I don't see that as being a problem. No. But I'm very concerned about anything that delegitimizes the outrage, the righteous anger that people are feeling.
Right. And also it's like, people who I just hope everyone is as outraged about, the government's violence and the police the police violence as they are about this. And I do think that we can do, chew gum and walk at the same time. And and I do think it is hard though to have a discussion that looks at organizing strategies and also does not, but kind of built into that, take takes for granted the fact that there's not anything immoral, because I don't think there is anything immoral about what's happening. I just have I'm curious about how, I don't know, to do it in the way that will get the fewest people killed, but not in a don't do that, guys. Like, don't rock the boat. Not at all like that. I do have some fear of there being a total.
Sure. Well, it's complicated. It is complicated. It's not a simplistic question.
Right.
And I think we have to acknowledge that and debate that, and form the grassroots organizing we need so we can respond. So we're not reacting every time there's a new outrage, and we have this conversation all over again, but don't really resolve it because we don't have a plan. And because unfortunately, too few people talk about the larger context of all the things that are wrong in this country that cause someone to be killed that way. So so we can debate it, but I'm not. I think I'm clear on this much. I'm not criticizing people who set that police precinct on fire.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm not.
Especially, and the one agent provocateur we know of is a cop. The guy in black with the hammer. I mean, it was kind of ridiculous. He's like the worst agent provocateur of all time. He's carrying an umbrella and he's smashing windows with a hammer. He conveniently had a hammer. And the guy with the pizza box is chasing him. It was kind of comical. But, and I know they denied it. It's like, no. But the guy's ex, it's a bit hilarious. His ex said, no, that's him. I know that's him. Yeah. But so we know about that outside and to have Black elected officials talk about agitators. The mayor didn't say outside agitator, but we knew what he meant. It's not Minnesotans and people. No, I'm not buying it. And we must reject a lot of what passes for leadership in this country. These are people we cannot give any credence to what they say.
Yeah. Someone said, just want to show this. Someone said he was wearing his ex-wife's mask. If someone wants to put that link in there, we can show the photo of it. And then someone asked this, can you discuss history of the term outside agitator?
Oh, sure. Well, that was a term always used in the South in the days of the civil rights movement, the liberation movement. The segregationists would sometimes say that their colored people, their Negroes, were happy. And it was outside agitators who were causing problems and making these previously happy people unhappy. And it is discredited. And to hear anybody talking about agitator sets off alarm bells in my head. And it's like George Wallace, or I don't know how. I feel like ancient that I know who George Wallace is. But Google George Wallace for those of you who don't know who he was. But the segregationist elected officials in the southern states in the 60s always complained about outside agitators who were causing trouble amongst their previously happy people.
Right.
And that's why it's such a problematic word.
And they were often, they often were framed as, or actually were, communists or Jews. Here's an image of it. This is one of like a classic
Martin Luther King at the Communist Training School. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know where he really was, but
and is that even him? I don't even think that's him.
Well, it's not a good picture.
It's like photo, yeah. I think where I think that is. I think that was it was at the Highlander School, which is where which is, for people who don't know, there was a place that trained organized and activists like
Rosa Parks.
Rosa Parks, yes, exactly. Who's not as much as people, and you can speak to this better than anyone else. As much as people like to pretend that she was a lone actor, inspired, and no disrespect to her, she gets a lot of credit, but she was part of an organizing movement. Yeah, she was an activist. She was a secretary for the local NAACP. She'd been trained in nonviolent direct action. So this story of the seamstress who was too tired and didn't want to give enough already. But yes, it was the term was applied to Black people and to white
allies.
Right.
And there were allies. There were white freedom riders. There were white people who were attacked and sometimes killed. We can think of Violet Liuzzo and the Schwerner and Cheney and Goodman and Schwerner, who died with Cheney in Mississippi.
Right.
So yes, the agitator label could be placed on Black people and white people too.
Right. Yeah.
But we need to put these people on notice. The term is not acceptable to us.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of like when people use, I mean, it's different, but when people still use the term alt left, someone was murdered, and then Trump called the people who murdered her, that side of it, part of the alt left. Like, Neera Tanden, who used to use that word a lot, the people who used to, traffic in it, most of them know you don't use that anymore because of Heather Heyer, but some people still do. But yeah, it's
so stupid. It's like the alt-right self-identified. They declared themselves to be alt-right. They claimed that they invented this term and claimed it and embraced it. There's no one who calls themselves alt-left. It's just a smear used against the left to delegitimize us.
Right. Yeah. That's exactly what it is. It's just to delegitimize, and it's very dangerous to equate. I mean, it's one of the most dangerous things that we've seen is when people equate the left and the right. Like the populist.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
right. It's Bernie Sanders is just like Trump because they both oppose TPP and resonate with angry people. If you hate Trump as much as you claim to, you want the guy who speaks to the people who will vote for him, who will take the voters away from him.
Unless you've been drinking the Kool-Aid and listening to accepting the propaganda.
Right.
So yeah, it's there. We have to be very careful. There are all these sneaky ways to. The goal is to get people to shut up and to be passive and to accept all these horrible things that they know are horrible, and they hope that we will stay asleep or will be afraid to act, or we just won't act, whatever our motivations are, that we will let them keep getting away with it. And that's why they couldn't allow even someone with liberalish reforms who would have had to fight his own party, even if he had become president. I mean, the odds of him being able to carry it out, but they know, and we should know our power. They are terrified that people will start saying, I'm not accepting this anymore. And they want to kill any idea that there can be change that benefits the people. They want people to take their own priorities off their agenda and to keep going along with this race to the bottom, the increasing poverty, the insecurity in this country that's never talked about. Half of all Americans are low income. The minimum wage hasn't gone up for years. And when the Democrats had the power to do something about it, they did not. So we have people who are already living precarious lives, and their lives have grown more precarious. And so that's why they want to shut this down. They want people to stay home. If it's George Floyd, if it's anything, they want people to be shut up and be quiet and accept their fate in this system that seeks only to keep exploiting.
Right. This is another thing that is reminding me of what you were saying. This was interesting. I don't know if you saw this, but let me just wait a second. It takes a while. So the original tweet that Ali Gharib, who's at The Intercept, is responding to is a tweet from Jill Filipovich, who said about this. In fact, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Who tweeted, maybe white anarchists should sit this one out. And then Ali said, what about white liberals, though? Which was a pretty good point. But that is made me cringe, that maybe white anarchists should sit this one out, because it's so it's almost like when a white person is trying to show how down they are, and they make fun of how bad white people are at dancing, how bad white people are at dancing, what bad dancers they are, we are, whatever. Uh-huh. And it's just okay, you're trying really hard. But then this, in addition to that, has a really dangerous, I think, political implication and attempt to delegitimize, people who are
Yeah, it's nobody should sit this out. It's
I
a good
know.
thing. It's a good thing that people of all, it was a very much a diverse, multiracial crowd at the protest. There were several protests in New York, but the one that I went to today, that is a good thing. Um, and why, if people want to be allies, it's an overused term, but if people
Yeah,
really
right.
mean it, they should be encouraged. And the fact is use of the term anarchist. So anybody in a black T-shirt at a protest is called an anarchist. They may be, they may not be. But who's to say that somebody has to sit this out? No, everybody. No, no, no. We should not discourage
I mean,
anybody from
yeah,
being active at this moment.
that's actually dangerous because we all
Yeah,
know, like, this part of what this is about is that Black people are seen as more disposable by the police.
right.
And you are trying to thin out the crowd. Like, if you are taking white people out of those crowds, you're actually like endangering the people who remain more.
Well, there's that, but I think one of their biggest fears is that there will be multiracial activism. It's terrifying to them, and
Right.
that's the last thing they want is people to identify with one another. So that, to me, if people are very serious about it, and um, and being an ally is, I always say the ultimate white ally was John Brown. So if you're willing to do what he did, you can call yourself an ally.
Right.
But
Uh,
I don't mean to
coward.
use that word loosely.
Right.
But no, this idea that uh, only the group that's impacted, in this case, Black people, should be the only ones who speak up. No, everybody should speak up. I'm glad other people are speaking up. We have unique problems, of course. Black people
Right.
we're the ones who are targets. We have this, as we say at Black Agenda Report, the Black misleadership class, the ones talking about agitators and Russians. These are people who are beholden to the Democratic Party donor class. They are joined at the hip, and their job is to keep Black people under control. And that's why they say things that are laughably stupid. They don't even believe this stuff. Mark Morial, I'm sure he doesn't believe that Russians are causing a protest in Minnesota. He knows that, but that's not his job. His job, to keep the money flowing, to keep his own prominence, is to follow. And it seems like a memo went out in the last 24 hours or so that, okay, people were upset about the video. The cop got arrested. So everybody, just forget about this. Go, nothing to see here. Move it along. And that's why these people are showing their naked, they're scoundrels. They're just scoundrels. People have seen too much. We've seen the movie. We know how it ends. We saw Eric Garner die and that cop get off. We've seen it before. And people are saying enough is enough. And as Joanna was saying, on top of COVID, the medical crisis, the death, the illness, the economic devastation, and this is it's the last straw. And I think that is why people are in movement all over the country and internationally too. This shows America. It shows America. And it can't be denied anymore. And that is why America has to be investigated officially as a human rights violator in so many different ways. But I think this solidarity is important. We Occupy, I was just thinking about Occupy and how that was smashed by a Democratic president. I was thinking about Freddie Gray's that rebellion in Baltimore, and Obama called the protesters thugs. And people, they may not be ready to talk about him in the way I am, but people still remember it, and that's why they're out. I also think when you take one step, it's easier to take the next one. And we're always told that what we can't have. You can't have health care. You can't get a raise. You can't. You have to be in student loan debt. You can't get your own apartment anymore. You have to live with all these things that you don't want, that dehumanize us and that threaten our lives. And when people step out, that's why they're trying to tell people not to protest anymore. Because if you go to a protest against police brutality, the next thing you know, you're going to have a general strike. Or you will threaten the power structure in some way. That's why it is so important, not just for George Floyd, but for all the things that make the system so inhumane, that give us police forces that kill 1,000 people every year, and pandemics that target one group or the most marginalized groups of people in the country. They are all tied together. And they're also terrified that we will see the connections, and that when we fight against one thing, then lo and behold, the scales fall from your eyes, and then you're fighting against something else. So that's why they're telling people to stay home.
It's a gateway drug. Gateway
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. And it is important. I think this, the more people, it's a safety, the power of numbers, right? I mean, it's just an organizing, old school organizing tactic that,
And they convince us that we're alone. We're always told that those of us on the left are alone. Nobody agrees with you. Nobody wants what you want. You can never have what you want. You're just crazy. Any number of things. And when you are literally with hundreds of other people or thousands of other people, then you know that's a lie. And then you'll take the next step to do something else that they don't want you to do.
Right.
It's a funny thing. I was thinking about a couple years ago. Do you remember when the cops got mad at de Blasio, and so they didn't write tickets for several days?
Yeah.
Well, our lives weren't any worse. I was like, well, I feel just fine. This is great to me.
I know.
And I was like, well, thank you for proving my case. We don't need as many cops. They don't need to have guns. They arrest people for BS. So we don't need them. And to have a society free of our capitalist society is to blame for. So as Joanna was just saying, it does not do anything for us. It's the days when, where many people had living wage work are over. Capitalism is just, it's sucking the lifeblood out of the economy and out of people. And the idea of Jeff Bezos being richer and possibly becoming a trillionaire at some point, it's just horrifying. The fact that we live under billionaire rule is killing us, killing the planet. And we have to talk about how to get rid of that too. And yes, we have people who've been so propagandized and think, anything that helps you is A, socialism, and B, is bad.
Right.
When we have this horrible system that's killing us all. But I also think that people will be less susceptible to listen to those things when they see other people acting and they see success.
Right. Yeah. When these things are less fringe. I mean, that is another thing
Exactly.
that I think was important about O'Byrne, is that he did show that these things that have been, they've been mainstream, but they've always been framed as fringe.
Yes.
And now we know that's not true. So
right. And that's why you have to delegitimize everything he said. And the way Black people were used in this campaign, it was just shameful to me. Telling Black people, well, you may want what he wants, but white people aren't going to vote for him. Yeah. And, since Black politics is dead and now consists only of keeping Republicans out of office, that was enough. All you had to do was convince people that trying to get what they wanted was somehow going to be bad for them. Right. But when events like this, like the time we're living in, it's easier for people to just throw out things they've been told and not to cling to things they may have accepted in the past.
Yeah.
This crisis of legitimacy can, if we are organized, can turn things around for us.
So, yeah. So how do we organize? Final question. What do we do? What is to be done?
We don't stop. First of all, we do not stop. We look at things that work. We looked at things that did not work. And we do not listen. If you don't know anything else, you have to know who not to listen to.
Right.
So these politicians using the word agitator and telling you to stay home, don't listen to them.
Yeah.
If you have had a plan with, and it can start very simply. If you go to a protest with a group of people and you have a plan to stick together, that can be the seed. That can be the start. And we have to study. We have to study history, study the past. But I think we can even start by asking questions. You don't have to know the answer. You can start by asking the question, or just believing what you see. You know things are wrong, and just say things are wrong, and be in solidarity with other people. I think trying to do things alone, even if it's trying to avoid being arrested at a demonstration, but they're always telling us to do things on your own, and that is proof to me that they're afraid of us being together and working together.